I wonder how many decisions you think you've already made today to get you to this point sat in this room. And when you think about it, I feel like I've actually made quite a lot of decisions today. I chose to get out of bed rather than to snooze the alarm again. I chose what to wear to have a shower, that my hair needed a wash, which way to walk to church, which snack to have from the snack basket, just to name a few. Scientists estimate that we make up to 35,000 decisions each day, which sounds like quite a lot, but it's part of our everyday life. There's the obvious ones that we do every day: what to wear, what to eat. That's become the bane of my life since I moved home. I love cooking, but every day I have to decide what I have in the fridge, what I want to eat, what I can be bothered to cook. Nightmare. But there's also those slightly less obvious decisions we make. The decision to keep listening to someone or to tune them out, to check or not check that notification, to take a sip of coffee. And then there are the bigger, longer-term decisions and plans that we have to make that affect more than just today and that affect more than just us. Where do I want to live? What job do I want? When should I retire? Do I or who do I want to marry? Do I want to have children? Where should I go on holiday? How much should I exercise? Who should I spend my time with? Life is full of decisions. We all have to make plans. And the plans that we make are all based on who or what we follow. Whether we realise it or not, we are all following something. Something shapes these plans and decisions that we make, whether it's consciously or subconsciously. It might be money, it might be a career aspiration, a goal, another person's lifestyle or expectations on us, or something else entirely. When you make plans, who or what are you following? We are currently in the middle of a series aptly called Following Jesus. Unpacking what it looks like to follow Jesus in our everyday, all areas of life, looking at the book of James. James was written by the half-brother of Jesus, an important leader in the early church. And he modelled what it looks like to follow Jesus and wrote this letter to the scattered church, including us, to encourage us to do the same. We've been going a couple of months now. You can catch up on our website. Hasn't it been really exciting to hear from loads of different voices and preachers? And this week, we are looking at what it looks like to follow Jesus when making plans. So let's read the passage together. If you've got a Bible, get it open, turn it on. It should also come up on the screen behind me. So we are reading from James 4, starting at verse 13. So this is verse 13. Now listen, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go to this or that city, spend a year there, carry on business and make money. Why? You do not even know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? You are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if it is the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast in your arrogant schemes. All such boasting is evil. If anyone then knows the good they ought to do and doesn't do it, it is sin for them. If we all make plans based on who or what we follow, then why should we follow Jesus? Why should he be the focus and reasoning behind our planning? There are other things that could dictate our plans, things that might make more sense, things that provide an outcome that we might prefer or gives us more control. So why should we follow Jesus? And if we decide we're going to follow Jesus, what does it look like to make plans whilst following Jesus? Let's unpack what James has got to say about it. He opens this section that we're reading today, looking with this imagery of traveling traders who are moving about from city to city. And this makes good business and financial sense to them. They are following the money. And on the surface, there seems to be nothing wrong with that. They're just trying to make a living. But this is exactly James's rebuke. Their only objective is the money. Making a profit overshadows everything else, including God. There's no room for God in their plans. But it's important to note before we go any further that plans aren't the problem here. Plans are important and necessary. Our world would be in even more chaos than it already is without planning. And God makes plans. We read throughout the Bible about this plan, a plan of salvation full of promises and prophecies that God will come and save his people. Jesus was always the plan. And when Jesus was on earth, he made plans too. Take the last week of his life, for example. He enters into Jerusalem and they have a Passover feast, the Last Supper, together. It's planned where it will happen, who will be there, where the donkey will be. Planning isn't the problem. So what is? James's problem with these merchants and traders is their presumption. They are presuming, making educated guesses as to what will happen and therefore what they should do and how they should respond. But the reality is life isn't always that simple. We can't assume what will happen in the future, what should happen in the future. James's teachings echo Jesus's throughout this letter, and this is a topic Jesus touches on too. In the Gospel of Luke, it recounts Jesus telling a parable of a rich man who yields an abundant harvest, and he thought to himself, "What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops." Then he said, "This is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry." The rich man is presuming that what would be best for him would be to store up his wealth in even bigger barns. And similarly to these traders, Jesus' problem with this rich man is not his plan or even his wealth. He had a good year. A good harvest isn't the problem. It's his presumption to store up his wealth, again leaving no space for God. He uses this language of my, and there I will store my surplus grain. And Jesus goes on to end this parable by saying, "But God said to him, 'You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself?'" In one night, all of this rich man's accomplishments and plans were ruined. And so as we do make plans, we can't presume we know what will happen. And James points this out in verse 14 as well, that like the traveling traders and rich man, none of us know what will happen tomorrow. There is so much that we cannot control. And although we know this in theory, I think sometimes we need reminding of it. And I think the pandemic showed us this. So many plans were made and then cancelled, remade and then cancelled again. I was planning to go on holiday with my friends, to sit my A-levels, to pass my driving test, all just gone, wiped out in a matter of weeks. And actually, maybe as a result of this, there's a bit of a shift in the culture where we used to kind of make these 5 or 10-year plans that got us to where we wanted to go. There's this push to just live in the moment because we don't know what will happen, so let's be here for a good time, not a long time. We risk either being obsessed with planning or throwing it out the window entirely. And James isn't challenging us or reminding us that our lives are just missed and we can't control things to scare us or to get us to stop planning. But actually, he wants us to give planning its proper place. And he's encouraging us to make these plans whilst following Jesus. all these other things that we can follow as we make plans can let us down, because they don't know the future either, and they don't have our best at heart. Life is unknown. We cannot presume what will happen. But when we choose to make our plans by following Jesus, we follow the one who is in the know. The one who knows what has happened, who knows what will happen, and who knows what is best for us. Because whilst we might be just a mist, we follow a God who is infinite and forever. The one who gave us the ability to make plans in the first place. So following Jesus when making plans means giving plans their proper place without presuming we know what they should be. So, what does this look like? James pivots at the start of verse 15. He says, instead, he's changing track. Instead, you ought to say, if it is the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that. Following Jesus when making plans means surrendering our plans to him. If it is the Lord's will is not a phrase to twist God's arm or a formula to be repeated that guarantees we will get everything we want. It isn't planning with God, but actually I'm the one making the plans and inviting God to get on board. And it isn't a weapon to get other people involved with my plans. This is the Lord's will, so get on board. But instead, if it is the Lord's will, is a heart posture, an attitude. It's a letting go and an acknowledgement that sometimes plans have to change, or God's plan might not be our first choice of plan. And Paul, another early church leader, uses this phrase regularly throughout his letters to different churches in the New Testament. He talks about visiting them, acknowledging both his desire to, but also the uncertainty of the future. And this attitude of surrender, and if it is the Lord's will, allows us to have space for both. To have desires and outcomes that we would like to see, outcomes we are naturally invested in, plans we hope come to pass. But it also allows faith and space to trust in God. But this doesn't always mean it's easy. I, alongside Alana, who a lot of you will know, have recently had to trust God with the provision of a house in York. I've learned a lot about having to surrender to him the outcomes of houses we liked that were the perfect sizes in good locations. And it's been really challenging. On the one hand, we really wanted them, but we also wanted God's plan. So we've had to learn to trust and surrender that his plan is the best plan. There's been disappointments, agonizing waits from estate agents. And at times, I found being out of control really challenging. But in it all, we've tried our best to surrender. And as we follow Jesus, making plans and surrendering our plans to him, we will, and I have, got it wrong sometimes. We snatch plans back into our own control, follow other things instead of Jesus. But luckily, Jesus sets the perfect example. On the night that he's arrested, Jesus goes to a garden with some of his friends to pray. We know from the Bible that he is in great emotional turmoil to the point that he's sweating blood. He knows what comes next. He knows the plan. The pain, humiliation, and shame of the cross. And yet he takes time to withdraw, to kneel down and praise this prayer. Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done. And this cup that Jesus refers to in this prayer is God's judgment on all people. For all the things we do that separate us from God. It gets called sin in the church. Jesus knows the cost, his death on a criminal's cross. And whilst he drank this cup on the cross, this plan had been in motion since the beginning. And it is this moment in the garden that he chooses to drink it, surrendering to God's plan. Not out of fear or obligation, but out of love for us. And his posture in the garden is the perfect example of this heart posture of if it is the Lord's will. But it is also so much more than an example. This isn't, Jesus surrendered, so we should surrender. Let's try and do better. But this is the reason and the means that we can surrender. And the reason that when we get it wrong, we are forgiven, set free, and still loved. Because Jesus' death wasn't the end. He rose again, defeating the power of sin and death and hell. He knows the big picture. It is finished. Death and sin do not get the final say. We can trust and depend on him. And we can follow him as we make plans, also not out of fear or obligation, but because he loves us and he is for us. And as Jesus prays this prayer and surrenders to God's plan, the next verse says that an angel from heaven appeared to him and strengthened him. As he surrendered, God was with him, strengthening him. And as we too follow Jesus and surrender, we have the Holy Spirit, God on earth, who can strengthen and encourage us too, as well as encouraging each other. So, following Jesus when making plans means surrender. But James goes on. He's not done yet. Look at verse 16. As it is, you boast in your arrogant schemes. All such boasting is evil. James is addressing this arrogance of the merchants. Not only have they made plans without God, presuming that they know what will happen, but they are proud of it, boasting in what they have done and will do without God. And the word arrogance here that James uses gives this sense of someone who exaggerates their qualities and achievements and trusts in their own power and resources. And he doesn't hold back in his assessment of this attitude. He calls it evil. This isn't something small or light. This matters to God. James is challenging where they think they can do better without God, where they do things in their own strength. And he's calling it sin, something that separates us from God. But this isn't just an attitude exclusive to these traveling traders. I can do the same. We can do the same. We can be full of arrogance and pride, thinking that we can do things in our own strength, both consciously and subconsciously. Pride says that I can do things in my own strength and that I don't need God, his power, his wisdom. I can be self-reliant. And before I moved to York, I spent a year down in Brighton. And even as I moved down there, people asked me right from the beginning, because it was just a year's program, people would ask, what's your plan for after? What are you going to do after this? And so often my reply went something like this. Well, I've got a uni place waiting for me in York, but if God has other plans, then I'm open to that. And on the surface, it sounds like surrender and humility. But if you dig just a little deeper, the reality of my answer went something like this. Well, I have a uni place waiting for me in York, but I don't want to go. So I'm really, really hoping that God has other plans or another opportunity comes up. Ideally that I can stay here because I do not want what the plan is. And as I look back on that season now, I can see that though it might look like surrender, the humility wasn't there. My heart was actually full of pride. It wasn't conscious, but in the face of loss of a community and city that I'd come to love and change that I was scared of, I tried to use this little power I had to take control and attempted to dress it up as God's will. I thought that God's best for me would be to stay. But actually, I, like these merchants, was just attempting to boast in my own arrogant plans. We can think we know what God's best for us would be. what the best outcome to a situation is, or try and persuade God that at the end of the day we could do a better job, even if it's seeded from things like fear and loss. And at the end of the day, James is calling it pride. Humility is the opposite to pride. And James actually talks about humility before this passage. Lucy unpacked it for us last week. I'd encourage you to go back and listen to it. But where pride and arrogance boast in our own strength, humility boasts in God. Where pride and arrogance is independent of God, humility is dependent on God. Where pride and arrogance is evil, humility is Christ-like. And surrender and humility go hand in hand. We need humility in order to truly surrender. And like with surrender, sometimes we get it wrong. We will inevitably try to make plans in our own strength, with what we think is best, independent of God. But because of Jesus' humility within his surrender, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. There is grace for when we get it wrong. And when I realized this pride that I was carrying, and to be honest, it wasn't even until I got to York that I realized I had to surrender it to God, but in return have encountered his forgiveness and his freedom. And we too can all discover that because Jesus humbled himself for us. Following Jesus when making plans means surrendering our plans in humility that God's plan is better than ours. What plans or decisions have you made recently, or you have coming up? Who or what are you following as you make these plans? Where are you finding it easy or hard to trust God and God's best? Do you need to know Jesus' love and forgiveness afresh? And James finishes this passage with verse 17. If anyone then knows the good they ought to do and doesn't do it, it is sin for them. He once again doesn't hold back and is clear. Once we know these things that we should do, we are to live them out, to be obedient. Otherwise, we are boastful and arrogant, which James has already been clear on. And it can be fairly easy to think about and talk about surrender and humility and depending on God. However, when it comes to living it out, it can be challenging. We can find ourselves acknowledging God and his plans, and then ignoring it because something else is actually more comfortable. It might not be our first choice. It might not be what we would have done. It might not make sense to us or the people around us, and so we make a different plan. We follow something else that isn't Jesus. Or we might find obedience challenging because of comparison. It can be so easy to compare our journey to the people's around us. Why doesn't mine look like hers? Why has God seemingly got plans for them and not for me? Or we can find ourselves piggybacking on other people's plans, making plans similar to them or plans that we think will make us look good. And actually, obedience as a concept in our world today can feel a bit uncomfortable. We live in a culture that tells you you can do what you want and you don't have to report to anyone. Live your own life, run your own race. But as James has already pointed out, there is so much in life that is uncertain and that we can't control. And this uncertainty of life, of being just a mist or a vapor, has this danger of creating a fear in us that causes us to just freeze. Well, what's the point of us doing anything then? But this isn't James's or Jesus's heart. They want us to follow Jesus in surrender, in humility, and to be obedient, not out of fear, but out of love and faith. Not to a distant or unknown God, but a God who has our best at heart, who came to earth to be close, who sent his Son to drink the cup for us so that we are forgiven, set free from our mistakes and shame, and loved even when we get it wrong. When we follow Jesus, we follow a God who has good plans for us, who sees the full picture. Like a parent who knows what's best for a child, he has plans even if the child can't see it. As a child, I didn't like having my hair brushed. It was a daily battle that I put my mum through. Until I decided one day that I was going to brush it myself. My plan was to brush my own hair. And that went really well until it became apparent that I couldn't reach the back. And Mum had to spend her Saturday afternoon detangling and taming out this massive matted section at the back. It turned out she'd actually had my best at heart. She wasn't trying to cause me pain or inconvenience, but actually it was best for now if she was the one that brushed it. And this might be a silly example, but the heart of a parent knowing what's best for a child is the same as God's heart for us as he calls us his children. And no matter your relationship with your earthly parents, we follow a good God who is for us, who keeps his promises, who sent his Son to die for us. And we can trust that his plans are good even when it's painful. And a verse that is often used quite generally when talking about God having good plans for us is found in Jeremiah 29, verse 11. You might have heard it before. It says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future." But this verse is more than just a nice sentiment, a quick fix, or cliche. We need to understand the context behind it. This was written by the prophet Jeremiah to the Jews, God's people. They'd been under enemy occupation for years, most recently the Babylonians, under whom they'd been exiled, sent away from Jerusalem, the home that they knew and loved. God's plan for them doesn't seem very good. And there's been some false prophets around who claim that their release and freedom will come soon. But it just turns out that this is false hope. Enter Jeremiah. He doesn't promise that their freedom is coming soon, but instead speaks this verse, promising prosperity even in the midst of exile and disappointment. God's plans for us might not immediately rescue us from hardship or suffering, and that can be really painful. But this verse promises that even in the midst of it, we can know God's prosperity, hope, future, and good plans. So, we all make plans. Short term, long term. It's a part of life. And we all follow something that shapes these plans that we made. Who or what are you following? Following Jesus means when making plans, means surrendering our plans in humility to him. That God's plans are better than ours, and following in obedience, trusting that his plans are good for us.